Let's get you our first view on the program. Lyn Alden is founder at Lyn Alden Invst Strategy. Lyn, good to have you back on the program. Thank you very much for your time. So last night the U.S. market seeing a bit of a pullback. VIX jumping to about 21. What did you make of it? Do you think on the S&P we see how are things looking? I mean, is it looking a little tricky, or you think we are headed to 6,000 as many sell-side brokers have raised their targets on the S&P? What's your sense?
I continue to have an upward bias toward the S&P 500. I think it's natural that there's some pullbacks here. The market's done very well recently. I do think that there are global markets that are more interesting right now than the S&P 500. It's still generally a crowded market compared to other markets that are out there. But there are a number of high quality equities throughout the U.S. market that are still reasonably valued, and I think they still plenty of room to grind up over time, even if maybe some of the most expensive names struggle a bit.
Lyn, hi, great to have you on the show. So, net, what is your stance on U.S. equities? The market's had a fantastic run, and the macro numbers have been looking good, while the rate cut expectations are obviously still intact. So, are you expecting equities to continue the strong momentum that we've seen so far this year?
I'm looking to see if there's a little bit of a rotation. I think right now there's a lot of capital stuffed into some of the more defensive equities. There are companies like Costco times earnings because investors are very piled into these defensive names. Whereas some of the cyclicals, some of the financials, and other areas of the market that are having more volatility in their underlying fundamentals are relatively unloved by the market. They're relatively inexpensive. And I do think that we could see a rotation where maybe the index doesn't perform very good, but that some of that concentration widens a little bit. There's a number of indicators showing that bank lending is less tight than it was a year or two ago. There's a number of liquidity indicators that are looking pretty good. And so I think this next year could surprise to the upside in terms of some of those parts of the market that are not particularly valued by investors at the current time.
Hi, Lyn. Good morning and good to see you in. This is Nigel on this side. What are you making of the dollar index bounce back? I recall one of your interviews when you joined us, you had mentioned that it looks like the dollar index is trying to form some kind of bottom and look for a bit of a bounce. So what's the trajectory on the dollar index? And with that sort of a backdrop, what's your view on emerging markets? I think you were getting a little bit positive on emerging markets.
Yes, my overall concern over the past month was that gold looked a little bit overbought and the dollar looked a little bit oversold. And so to set expectations, my view was I wouldn't be surprised to see a consolidation. And that's what we've seen so far. I think basically the global markets got a little bit too enamored with gold in the near term and a little bit too bearish on the dollar in the near term, and that some of this retracement is natural. I still think in the coming years, gold is headed higher. I think it's a pretty structural bull market. And I am still favorable toward a number of emerging markets, but these things don't really move in a straight line. And sometimes overcrowded positions have to get shaken out. So I think that's a normal and healthy part of the market. And I think that emerging markets have a really big wall of worry to climb. They have to really prove themselves to global investors that have not really had good performance with those for quite a while. At least, some markets more than others. But if you look at the global aggregates for emerging markets, that's been a troubled area. And so I think it's going to take time for them to prove themselves to investors and attract that marginal capital from around the world.
Okay. All right, Lyn, we will leave it on that note for this morning. Thanks so much for joining in with some perspective. I look forward to our next conversation. Let's